The scientists studying the Clementine photos were looking for geological evidence that you can't see in normal visible light photos, or even in the original filtered images sent back from Clementine. The scientists mentioned in the article were developing a method for identifying fresh impact craters from the photos. If it were as easy as just looking at a raw image, they wouldn't have needed the study. The image presented in the article is a processed image. They state that in the article itself. It's obviously not an original Clementine image. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is go out to the JPL library and search through the Clementine images. You can find literally hundreds of photos taken of the same area as the photo in the article. Of course, you have to create a negative of those photos to get anything closely resembling the photo in the article. But even doing that, there's not one that looks just like the article's photo. I didn't go through all of them, of course, but none of the 95 published photos that I viewed had any distinct black spots anywhere near the Apollo 15 landing site.
I guess he wasn't looking very hard at his own photography. Webb was kind enough to link us to the JPL site and provide us with the data. Here is the first image I pulled up. It's image number LUC4228L.299. First of all, the picture size is only 384 by 288 pixels, so blowing it up in Sony Vegas only distorts the picture quality. Webb claims that the Clementine anomaly won't show up in any unprocessed Clementine photo like this one, and yet a white spot clearly shows up in the dark splotch's place. And I didn't need to make a negative of the photo to find it either. Even dark splotches B and C register as white areas in this photo. Obviously, in these unprocessed photos, it appears white. In the processed image, it appears dark. Ironically enough, this white splotch even appears in the 5 unprocessed photos that Webb shows in his own video. I just can't imagine how observant he must have been with his other 90 pictures. In any case, thank you, Webb, for proving conclusively that this dark splotch would indeed appear as a bright region in the visible light spectrum.
Jarrah turns to an article from the JAXA website, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. In that article, they say that a bright area photographed by their SELENE Kagaya spacecraft, what they call a potential halo, was made brighter by the lunar module's descent plume. At least that's what I think it says. That seems to be Jarrah's interpretation as well. Like the Space.com article, this one is poorly written, and as an added bonus, it's in broken English. I read it over 20 times, and I'm still not exactly sure what it says.
If you prefer, you can go to the NASA website, reporting basically the same thing. It's much more professionally written, and in fluent English to boot.
Before we award Jarrah a point for his observation, I want to examine another item briefly mentioned in the Clementine article. Let's look at an old photo, something Jarrah knows exists and failed to comment on, the Apollo 15 pan-camera frame 9377. This was taken by astronaut Alfred Worden while riding in the command module Endeavour at about 100 miles above the landing site. According to NASA, this photo was taken about an hour after the end of the stand-up EVA. By the way, Jarrah actually uses camera frame 9377 twice in his video.
Actually, the image I used was image number AS15M-1135. It's a metric image, you know, from the same batch where someone duct-taped balsa wood in front of the camera. Of course, Webb could argue that these images were composited together to make up the pan photography, but I did not use this image twice in my video, only once. The other image was taken by Lunar Orbiter, not Apollo 15.
A high-resolution detail of this photo shows the area immediately around the lunar module. The solar elevation was about 10.5 degrees to the east, as is evident by the casts on the inside of nearby craters. You see a bright area just south of the lunar module, similar to the halo in the JAXA photo, but wait a minute. This bright area looks different than the JAXA photo. How can that be?
And just where did I claim that the bright area shouldn't look different? Webb goes on to show that the Apollo 15 photo shows the left side of the crater lit up, whilst the JAXA photo shows the right portion of the crater lit up. I agree, and I never claimed otherwise. However you look at it, it's just a crater lit up by the sun. The illuminated site all depends on where the sun is in the sky.
What the folks at JAXA theorize is that the surface layer throughout the crater was brightened by the lunar module engine plume.
And here they accuse me of making strawman arguments. Nowhere in the JAXA article, or any other JAXA pages that I have found, do they mention a thing about brightening any crater. Nor do any of the other sites I have read. They all apply this brightened region to soil disturbance. The only mention of any crater within the JAXA article is a little caption for this picture showing the supposed Apollo 15 landing site and Archimedes crater. Archimedes is the big crater seen in the middle, and it's 200 kilometers away from the alleged landing site. Like Apollo was real, Webb knows the halo is just the brightness of the crater. But desperate to cling on to JAXA's baseless engine disturbance claim, he turns around and says that the crater was brightened. At least Apollo was real had some misleadingly cropped photos to base that erroneous claim on. Webb bases this argument on a totally unfounded misrepresentation of JAXA's position. It's amusingly ironic that this group now claims the crater itself was brightened, because before the LRO photos came out, back when I stated these anomalies were just natural craters, propagandist insisted that these alleged disturbed regions were anything but craters. In the comments page of my first video making such a claim, David Greer wrote, "Further, the splodge can't be a crater as all the other craters exhibit a shadow and a portion lit by the sun. This one has no such highlight." The penny drops. Here's the pattern. A satellite photographs a crater, and NASA and their supporters try to pass it off as a jet blast disturbance. You argue that it's just a crater. They insist it's not a crater. Another satellite photographs the same area, proving that it is just a crater. They just claim the crater itself was disturbed. This is not the scientific approach. It's grasping at straws and backpedaling to try to cling onto a piece of so-called evidence that has been debunked 6 ways to Sunday.
The shape of this crater becomes more evident in Apollo 15 pan camera frame 9798, taken about 40 hours later, shortly after the second EVA. This photo shows the landing site and crater in more direct sunlight. Actually, this photo not only shows the lunar module and a significantly shorter shadow, but also the lunar rover, disturbed regolith where the astronauts had walked around the lunar module, and a footpath out to the ALSEP, the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package.
And what about this dark portion in the top right? Is this soil disturbance by the astronauts too? It's certainly not covered in any of the transverse maps I have seen. Let's face it, with resolution this poor, you could argue that that's a wheat field on the moon.
You don't have to land directly in the middle of a crater to stir up the dust. If the lunar module flew anywhere in the vicinity of the crater, the engine exhaust could cause dust to scatter down one side of the crater and up the other.
What about the dust on the more level terrain? Webb doesn't tell his viewers. This has been elaborated time and time again throughout this video, but one more won't hurt. Due to the enormous spread of the engine exhaust, the dust would be scattered across a vast distance. 150 meters, as all scientists seem to agree on. And this disturbance would have been noticeably visible from orbit, and definitely would have placed the LEM deep within the halo. Remember, the engine is blowing the dust away at 2,500 meters per second. And according to the Apollo 15 footage, the engine was shut off 5 seconds after contact with the surface.
8 feet, -1. Contact. Man. Okay, Houston, the Falcon is on the plane at Hadley. Roger, Roger, Falcon.
Even if you don't buy the bit about the dust being stirred up in the crater, you have to admit that JAXA found the same crater that you see in the LRO photo.
So what? This exact same area was previously photographed by the Lunar Orbiter 5 of 1967, long before the Apollo 15 mission. I even show and mention such an example in my very video that Webb is replying to. Having ready access to detailed 1 meter per pixel resolution maps of virtually the moon's entire surface, all NASA would need to do is pick whichever landing site they want and then build their sets and props using the photos as a reference. Do I really need to repeat this every frickin' episode when even the most amateur of historians know these pre-Apollo photos as common knowledge?